Welcome everyone and welcome to Rethinking Balance Sheet. And every Friday we're here, Ravi and I, my co-conspirator Ravi Navaratnam from Sage Street Capital. Ravi, we talk about, what do we talk about actually, Ravi?
Well, good morning, Roshan. We are back to our, we took 2 weeks off, went to see, talked about finishing up episode 4 and 5 of a series on corporate and complex restructuring, mainly, to the benefit of very large corporations, but still may have had some relevance to the sector that we're trying to help here, the small, medium-sized companies and the startups. We're back on that same show today and on rethinking how the balance sheet can be supported in terms of startups. And on that note, we are very fortunate. We've got Rafiza from Cradle to join us. Just to pick up on last week's show, a lot of ladies were happy, good-looking guys on the show. They were very happy. But the guys said, we didn't quite meet their demands. So we got Rafiza on. We got also not only a very, very smart chartered accountant, LSE graduate, ex-Dana Hatta, all the credentials, but plus very, very good-looking. So we're going to have a great show.
All right, so let's get Rafiza on with us. Rafiza, welcome to the show. Rafiza Ghazali from Cradle. I think they said they were the
okay. One problem, guys. Rafiza is married, so I'm sorry to get your expectations on. Rafiza's married.
Thanks.
So Rafiza, welcome to the show, and it's always glad to have you. You're fantastic. You have a lot of knowledge, and you come from. You come from industry, right? With your background in Sime Darby and Vesco and other areas. Maybe you can just start by telling us a bit about yourself and how you got to become the head honcho at Cradle Fund.
Okay. Hi. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's such a pleasure. And Ravi, it's good to see you again. Roshan, good to see you again. Just to start off, Ravi is my first boss in Malaysia. This was back in 98. Okay, so we've gone a long way.
Gives away your age, though. But you don't look it.
It's more of your age, Ravi. I'm not. The fact that you're my boss, so that shows there's a big differential between you and me. Okay.
So, okay.
I'm just kidding. So anyway, thank you for having me here. Yes, Roshan. I've had, I would say, probably a number of various experiences. I've worked with small companies, where there's only 20 people. I've worked with international MNC. I was at Thomson Reuters. I was head of Asia of their Islamic finance business. So I've been in the sales frontliner. A lot of people consider Thomson Reuters a data, news and technology company. So I've been with Dana Harta, again, like what Ravi mentioned, during the crisis. So managing, going through crisis is nothing new for us. So I've seen like 4 crises, in my working career. I was at Bank Negara, I was at public listed companies, I was a CFO of Valesto before I came to Cradle. Now, a lot of people were wondering, like, why me? Why did I pick this job? So there are 2 questions, obviously. Number one, why me and why? And, because again, we all know a lot of people, question like, oh, I don't come from a startup, background or whatever. So, and I keep on telling people, Cradle is not a startup. Cradle is a government agency. It's a Sdn Bhd. It's got its sets of governance. So it's no different from other companies that I came from. And the reason why, again, that they wanted someone who has got a lot of industry backgrounds is because we deal with governments, we deal with taxpayers' money. So they need someone who's very strong at governance to make sure that, we are holding public's money and we're in a position of trust. So the background of where I came from, like Bank Negara, was a positive thing because, I know how to manage funds, and this is my experience at Bank Negara. Governance was a strong thing that they look at as well. Processes, managing cash flow. So those are a lot of I would say, when they interviewed me, so those are the things that they were looking for. They needed someone to manage a corporations that managing government's funds. So, why do I need to have a startup background to run Cradle? That's number one. Number two is someone who, have, again, my experience at Dana Harta helped me a lot as well to get this job. It's no difference when Ravi, you were there in 1998. We were, looking at SME companies. They're all in financial difficulties, and it's the same thing, So I took what I learned a lot when I was at Dana Harta. That experience helped me a lot when I took over the job at Cradle, because almost all our startups, some have got a lot more financial difficulties than others. If they're not in financial difficulties, they're having issues on growth, because they can't cope up. Suddenly, the demand for their business suddenly accelerated, and they couldn't cope because they probably only have 10 people, 15 people. Suddenly, clients are coming in wanting to have their business. So there's a lot of issues. So there's a lot of similarities there, and that's, for me, that's also the reason why. So back to my second question, why me? I've answered that. And why do I take this job? I felt that it was like Dana Harta all over again, helping companies, their startups versus SMEs and large corporations before, helping startups, on to survive, for the next couple of months until this, stabilize. So yeah, that's a little bit of a background. It's been 1 year now, and it has been a roller coaster. I think last weekend was probably the first weekend that I really had a rest, working weekends, working evenings, and yeah. So, and here I am. I hope that answers the question.
No, absolutely. And one of the things I think that's very interesting is that many people say this pandemic has accelerated digitization and innovation, and maybe it's true. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Is that really true? And what you said just now, it seems to be like two ways, right? There are some tech companies that are suddenly got huge demand for their services, but they just cannot scale. On the flip side, there are many that are dying, especially the B2B types, where it's harder to sell, where it's harder to implement technology in organizations and so on. So it seems, and as organizations start to scale down on purchasing, so it seems to be almost a complete opposite or extreme. What are your thoughts? I mean, has COVID really, in Malaysia specifically, accelerated this innovation and
it's a bit of a mix. It all depends on the startups' services and business model, and their products. Okay, areas like, for example, logistics, e-commerce, they're a high demand, of their businesses. So those are the ones that we see that who find it very difficult to cope. It's a good problem to have, but it is still a problem. Okay, because they can't get the right people in. Having to fulfill the customers. So those are good problems to have, but it's still a problem. Okay. Now the other ones that are affected, unfortunately, are the ones that who are probably, the services are very affected. Like we have a startup that's doing events. So there's no events. So they had to quickly pivot, but it takes a while. It's not so easy. It all depends on the technology. Is the technology able to pivot very quickly? One of our investee companies, and I don't like to mention names, but I'll just describe who they are, So in the restaurant POS, services. So as you can see, restaurants had to be closed down, right? But they managed to pivot into, delivery ordering, and restaurants reservation, payment, e-payment. So those are the things. And another of our investing company is a platform that provides all the various like cleaning services. So they pivot into providing disinfection services because a lot of their sort of partners were not able to provide those services during the lockdown and things like that. So you've got two types of problems. One is that they couldn't find the business because of their business model. We had one which provides a platform for childcare, so that's affected as well because a lot of families are not very comfortable having outsiders to come, and plus the child can't go to school and the parents are working from home, so there's no demand for childcare anymore. So those are the sort of things, and but whether or not they have the first issue and the second issue, what we see that is quite common in almost all of the startups is the cash flow. They're tight on capital. They don't have a long runway, and it's not like they have a facility that they can just tap immediately. It takes a long time to get investors, and plus, initially at the beginning, investors were very wary on investing in the startups. So those were, when I first came in for the first 6 months, those were the biggest issue that we have with the startups, regardless of whether they have huge business or they don't have business. Cash flow is their number one problem. Yeah.
And Cradle, I guess, but part of it is to continue to support the companies that you already invested in, but you're also looking at potentially supporting other ventures and other ideas and other innovation also, right? I'm assuming at Cradle. And because of this pandemic, I think many people, and I see a huge number of people losing their jobs. Many people get into this whole, let's start up a new business, let's get into digital, let's figure out how to do some of the things that we are good at doing, but on a digital landscape.
Yeah.
I guess the big question is, we see more and more people pivoting and getting into this space, and like you said, right, there's need for cash to scale, there's need for cash to sustain yourself.
Yes.
Do you see investors flocking in to this changing landscape, to this space? Because it seems, there's very little data to say that people are rushing in and people want to support these new ideas, and what is Cradle also doing in that light?
Yeah. So I was just listening to podcasts by this someone over the weekend. Is that at every crisis there's always opportunity, and big the ideas that are really big comes from solving problems. So for the last 6-9 months, there's actually a lot of opportunity because there's a lot of problems to be solved, right? So it's just a matter whether or not you're quick enough to identify those problems. And we saw that a lot. We saw people seeing, okay, there's an opportunity for us to do this or to address this, and these are urgent needs. People had to change their lifestyle. I think this is, in my X number of years living, this is probably the biggest change in drastically in everyone's life globally. So obviously there's a lot of gaps and there's a lot of problems to be solved. And you talk about investors, right? There's actually, surprisingly, I get a lot of investors that are looking for, say for example, if someone comes up with a good idea, but unfortunately not many are quick enough to actually conceptualize that idea. So they're still what I saw, especially the first few months, they're still hesitating. Can this work? Can this work?
Yep.
But then you see the likes of Grab, who's got very strong capital power. They took that opportunity very, very quickly. Like they repurposed their ride-hailing drivers to become delivery. So they took that opportunity. So I think, and those are the kind of things that the investors are looking for. We see a lot of interest in the area of logistics because obviously everyone's shopping online. Logistics, e-commerce, health tech, because now everyone's very concerned about their health. So anything to do with, rapid testing. So you see a lot of that, and a lot of investors are actually trying to identify, is there something, at early stage that you can, take opportunity with. We see some, but not as much as we would like to, because I think, at that time, to be fair, people are still struggling, to cope with their day-to-day life. So yeah, but
Maybe,
yeah.
Rafiza, if I asked you a little bit of a different question, yeah,
Mm.
yeah, we know about logistics, we know about how gloves and the obvious industries that have done well, but if I was a struggling construction company, that's a real problem there. And I can see, I think we just did an analysis and we're going to issue a paper on this. But if you look at some of the big companies have swung from 100 million positive cash flow in the leading to 2019, 12 months, and the comparable period in 2020 is minus 200 million. So it's a 300 million swing. That's at the largest companies, right? But what would be the solutions for like construction sector? Can we see things like, doing a lot of stuff not on the site where there's lots of mixing of workers, taking it off site, prefabricating, etc. Is there any kind of innovation in those kind of sectors, or even I know property they've had virtual. I mean, in another struggling industry, they've had virtual, showrooms, etc.
Yeah, showrooms and stuff like that.
Yeah. What about these sectors, which are, holidays? I think it's impossible. You can put a nice video and see anything.
Yeah, of course.
That's out. But what about these sectors which are less spoken about?
I think with construction, you're right. It's not easy, and prefabricating is something that a lot of people talk about even before COVID.
Correct.
We all know that, right? Even when I was at SAMW, we were looking at doing prefab houses, prefab apartments. But it's just that at that time, it was not just commercial viable at that time, because, we still have cheap labor, we still have all this cement, and, we don't have the engineering capability to actually do that. We look at a cost. It ended up, costing 50% more to build on prefab basis compared to the traditional, because the ecosystem is just so tight, and you need to think about regulations of all this prefab construction. It's not that's also the reason why Mosty, about a year ago, they came out with the Dasar Science Distin, and because they know that Malaysia still needs a lot of work to go into deep tech. So we're looking at engineering capability, biotech capability. So a lot of the funds from the government are now moving into deep tech, as opposed to the typical software platform, where I think those are probably, if you need long term solution innovation, you're talking about innovation, we need to be the producer of innovation rather than adopter of innovation. At the moment, we are still adopting innovation, and even then we're still struggling. I was at a big conglomerate before. It took us 1 year to get people to win the idea that 100-year-old company needs to be innovative. That's how long it took. So, and this is the reason why Mosty is really, really pushing for us to have, research capability, commercialization capability, because to address exactly what you're talking about, Ravi. So,
yeah, but coming back to that, and that's one of the things which I like what you were saying was you've got one of the things which is successful now, and I can see is sometimes you say governments trying to decide things are difficult, but that's not entirely true. Because they say 1 million entrepreneurs trying something, somebody will find something and it works, which no government can think. But I think there's a flip side of it, and there's an acceptance now more and more, even in the most capitalist economies. There's a role for government in terms of the big risks, the big ideas, right? The other side of the coin is also, I think there's also needs to be some landing. Is you can go on the science part, but is there any thinking in terms of, for example, if you talk about this perennial problem of foreign workers and the huge problems that it's shown, but unless you change the market, you change the market space and say, look, we're going to cut off the supply of foreign workers, then like you said, that idea for fabrication or offsite, it's still cheaper to hire 1,000 guys and have them on the work site.
Yeah.
No doubt they'll end up with more COVID and despicable working conditions.
Yeah.
But that's on the cash flow side, it's still better, right?
Yeah. So that's why now even though it's still not commercially attractive, we're really pushing for development, innovative things like in the robotic area. Like I said, cleaning is probably cheaper to get to people cleaning rather than develop robots that can do the cleaning, But we have no choice, moving forward, we need to invest. And this is where the government, because commercial companies are not going to invest in that, because they say, why should I? I have 10 people I can easily hire, pay 2,000 ringgit, 3,000 ringgit to do the cleaning, and there's this robot that cost me 120,000 to do the cleaning. So but
we need 3 people to maintain it.
Yes.
And high-tech people to maintain it.
Exactly.
Yeah, the payback doesn't justify it. Yeah.
I remember this so clearly in Seagate, when I worked in Seagate so many years ago. But of course, technology has moved on. Our 2 competitors, Maxtor and Miniscribe, and I remember the president, he's an ex-Marine, he used to come down and give us a briefing every quarter, and I was part of management at a very early age. So I got to go to these meetings, and he said, you look at our factory in Kallang, it's definitely not the most modern. And of course, the others were talking about robotics, Maxtor and Miniscribe. But the product was changing too fast. A disk drive, only product has 2 years. By the time the competitor had jigged his machine, we're already into the next product. And of course, those 2 went bankrupt. Yeah, both Maxtor and Miniscribe went bankrupt. Seagate survives today. And that's, I think it was a problem 30 years ago. I think it's still going to be an issue. But like I said, sometimes it's the government which needs to take some of this risk.
Yeah. And the situation as well, say for example, when, so now we found that a lot of, say for example, property buildings, they can't bring in the foreign workers, right? So they have no choice. So I think we need those. Number 1 is the government support, and number 2 is the external environment that force them to look into this. So I think this is the only time where we have the external force really pushing, because they can't get the staff, and cleaning is not something that you can do remotely. You need someone physically to be there, and even though no one's occupying the building, you still need to clean the building, you still need to do maintenance of the building, right? So those are the areas which it's tough. It requires a lot of interventions, and the situation is at the moment the best situation. Once everything's sort of back to pre-COVID, I wouldn't call it normal, then you don't know. The commercials may change, So
Yeah. Rafiza and Ravi, let's just take a couple of guests that are joining us. Sashi saying exciting, always fun. Glad. Kiru says glad I joined. We are glad you joined too. And Jackie is like well said, Rafiza. And there's a question from Purpal who's basically saying, opinion on the following question: is there a situation where bigger orgs that pivoted for survival only to gobble up the market share of smaller operators in that segment? I mean, Grab is an example, I guess, of something like that. Your point earlier on Grab, I think reinforces, I guess, his question is that, when a bigger company, is well funded, gets into a certain space, they right away are able to fund innovation, they are able to fund development, and be able to get to a certain threshold. Plus, they have a platform, right? Whereas many of these smaller players may not be well funded, may not have the access, and they're playing in a small capacity, maybe in a small region or so on, and they are quickly wiped out, right? So how do we address issues like this?
So it's okay. Yes and no. During the pandemic, what we saw as well, what we observed is a number of the smaller players grouped together. And this is, when I meet some of the startups, they will probably have the first phase, second phase, third phase, So what I just tossed the idea, look, rather than developing to the third phase, is there a partner that where you could work with or another startups? So we saw a number of startups partnerships. We saw a few, like one of our startups actually provide subsidies, for other startups to place their ads on the platform. So we're seeing a lot of this. So it's just a matter of, and this is where we encourage all our startups to really identify what are the missing gaps. We're seeing some of the larger companies or people with capital identifying and asking us, do you have a startups that do from K to R or something like that, because we're missing this, so no point in us developing this. Could we partner? So we see a lot of that. So it's not just big companies taking advantage of them, but I think there's also opportunities for smaller companies to group together. That and they don't necessarily need to do a merger and acquisition. It's just a simple partnership, non-exclusive and things like that, and they can do all around. So you see, like for example, a lot of drivers, they have Food Panda, Grab, and few other Lala Move, uniform that they can change, between certain hours to certain hours. So it's.
But it requires, I think it requires a big mindset change, because I think especially big companies, they want to own the ecosystem, because partnerships require to kind of be able to manage an ecosystem and be part of it, rather than thinking of ownership.
And just to add on that, right? And I think they are in a much better position to take this opportunity, because all it does, it requires the founder to say yes or no. Big corporates, they have to write a board paper, this paper, that committee, this committee, So whereas a lot of the founders, okay, let's do that. Let's try. And this is where, try, fail, pivot, reiterate, that sort of thing, which a lot of the big corporates, they are not in a position to do that. So that's why yes and no, like you mentioned, big corporates have the muscle and the capital to do that. But they're not out there on the grounds. The ones on the grounds, the smaller companies, are the one that could quickly identify and say yes. Okay, I want to do this.
Plus, they have the agility, I guess, to be able to I think Jonathan adds, anecdotally, I've seen and worked with corporations that acquired startups.
Hi, Jonathan.
Expertises, Jonathan from Rice, solutions to enter new markets and to compete with new smaller players. Given the larger incumbents have more resources and pre-existing clients, so they invariably would a lot of pressure on these smaller. So I mean, that's the other piece of it, the acquisition opportunity for bigger players, I guess. To look at this. But again, that's a mindset, right? You may not necessarily need to acquire them, like you said. A partnership would suffice. And I think Devendran adds to this. Spare
Hi, Devendran.
Already part of the digital studio by creating value and unlocking hidden capital that is the tied up in our clients' spare parts warehouse by publishing moving parts to our e-commerce platform. So one more comment is coming, but I think what we're going to do is we're going to take a very quick little break, and we're going to come back, because I think there's a lot more that we want to cover today. We want to talk a little bit about Cradle, but in the meantime, let's just check out Nicole, one of the best or the only AI-based learning app in Asia at this point in time. So let's check out this LXP Nicole.
Jackie 啊，你有捌聽啲咧叫 app 叫 Nicole 咯
？Nicole 是做乜？
唔是啦，我甲你講 app 啦嘛。其實你看啲 Nicole 啊，你看，伊加了也有真正一 article、podcast、courses 嘅啊。我甲你講啊，你愛變好命，你愛好命。
愛好命啊，定啲？
你愛趁錢無？
趁錢類咯。
啊，所以啊，你特別用 Nicole，真係你讀啦，你看伊 article 嘅了，讀了，你變真高嘅，知無？
有影無？嚟我看啲。
有影，你看啲 article 看按照好命。按照趁錢類，哇！呀，你講他，
你一個看好了嘛，越來越高。
有啦，甲你講了嘛，你咪聽，當今你特別去看，特別看個了，
睇個了。你講你真高啦，我
OK， 好，你先好來。
Welcome to Retaking Balance Sheet, and if you want to get your own personalized learning app, Nicole.app app on nico.tech. You can check that out. We've got another LinkedIn user who says, look, strategic thinking can help spur innovation, whether in startups to growth stage ones. However, no amount of funding can spur this. It takes more than funding, fancy initiatives and gimmicks to do that, especially during a pandemic. A business or an individual needs to step back, pause, and look at where they came from, where they have, where they are going, what they have, where they're going, and where they can go, and more importantly, where can they go? So I would assume you would agree with this, Rafiza.
Yeah. So like I said, there are funding. There are funding out there. When I talk to the other VCs, they said you talk to two groups, right? You go to the startups. They said there's no money out there, no one's investing. But then when you go to the VCs, they have money, but they have nowhere to put in, So I think there needs to be, how to say, as like the person said, a step back, a step back. And like I said, what problem are we solving? Anyone wants to use that services at the price that you offer. You can have a fantastic service, you can have a fantastic product, but if no one's asking for it and no one thinks they can, nobody think that they can't do that without, then you can't sell. So those are the things that I always tell the startups. You need to be at a stage where people can't do without your services, can't do without your product. There's no way I can do without Grab food at the moment. Like there's no way. So you need to think of that mindset, because sometimes it may be. It may be a nice to have, and then I said, but that's not good enough. That's not what the investors are looking for. That's number one. Number two is there opportunities. Investors, they're always looking at valuation. Valuation doesn't mean that you need to make profit. What are the opportunities? What are your future cash flows? What are your future, markets that you can tap in? So those are the things. And I always tell our funders from day one, you need to think globally. You can't think that, I'm only going to serve people within, the Bangsa area or the Kepong area or the Gombak area. It's got to be something that you can also solve the problem in South America, in Africa. Those are the areas where a lot of opportunities. You need to think about, areas that are not developed. You can't compete with the developed, community, because, they have far more advances and far more opportunities, and you're not solving that problem. So we always tell, is this scalable? Is this disruptive? Because, we don't want to fund ideas that, 20 other people thought about, 15 years ago, so it may be a good idea, now, but people have thought about it. So those are the things that I always, sort of share with a lot of our founders, that you need to have that when you answer the questions, when you do your pitching.
Sure. I want to jump into Cradle, but before that, I want to take on one other issue. But let me just quickly get through. Dave says back hi to you, Ravi, but not hi to us. Rafiza, I think we should be upset. We didn't get a hi. And Jonathan,
I used to buy BMWs from him those days.
and yes, the Nicole ad is in the Nicole ad is in Hokkien, Jonathan, and it's in actually about 15 other languages. So with that, I want to talk about unemployed grads just before we get into Cradle, because I think it sort of ties into this area, and we see a lot of unemployed grads, especially in Malaysia. And I think for me, one of the things that's interesting is, when we talk about how do we, what kind of initiatives or what can we do to help these guys, and I had a conversation about maybe a month ago with my board member. So my board, Paul Maka, who's the provost of Stanford University, sits on our board. So Paul and I were talking, and I said, look, I'm low on cash and I need resources and so on. And he said, look, there's this whole group of the Stanford grads and all these university grads who took a gap year, and they realized after taking a gap year that, hey, I'm sitting in the house and watching Netflix because I can't travel around the world. Go tap these intellectual, the intellect of these guys and get them to work for you for free. And we did, right? So we ultimately put together a program that managed to harness these guys to come and be part of us. But in Malaysia, right? We have that same issue. How do we harness this talent And how do we? I mean, it's not just about jobs, right? It's about how do we get them and to be productive, and be able to manage that. I mean, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. Okay. So when I was at Samdabi, we had this government-led initiative that was driven by Khazanah, and it's called SLIM, Scheme Lanjutan Satu Malaysia or whatever. So these are unemployed grads. And I'm a huge proponent of that because I've seen some really good SLIM trainees that came to us. They're unemployed not because they're not smart enough or they're not good enough. They just probably didn't know how to how to carry themselves at interviews. They don't know what are the things that they need to show to the interviews, and they probably come from backgrounds that they were not exposed to how to even act at the office. So what we do is that we took a huge number of slims and worked with us, and in fact in my own team I had like about 4 of them, and we give them training, just exposure. This is how you write emails, this is how you write simple letters, and we think some 6 months they become employable. And so from that idea, and again, when I was at Velasco as well, whenever they have STEAM and then they call it, different names, there's been a number of rebranding of that scheme, but it's similar, So now we've been talking to a number of universities, right, where we can do a program because our startups need resources, but they may not necessarily be able to pay at the moment, because but they need resources.
Absolutely.
Now, university students, they need experience. They may not need the money now because they need enough to go by, but more importantly, until the time when they can get the job that they want, they need experience. And I always tell, my daughter is at university level, right? And I always tell the kids, look, when the first few years of your career, it's not about the money, it's about the experience. And especially if you want to start your own startup, what better ways to shadow a good startup founder and see and see for yourself what it takes and how it is to work in the startups. So this is what we are trying to work on, and we see a lot, but it's just that a matter of trying to balance between, because startups they need someone tomorrow. But university, they say, oh, we can only offer internship between this period to this period, so there's a bit of how to say fine tuning, but hopefully we can come to a good landing where we sort of, okay, these are all the, and especially now universities now, a lot of their degree require working experience. So if we can have that on a bigger scale, that will probably, it's not going to solve the entire problem, but at least it's part of a problem.
Maybe if I can intervene. Sorry.
Sure. Go ahead.
Actually, what I was more interested is, graduates is one thing, but I know in Singapore, for example, they actually matched up doctorates, PhD people with SMEs. Now, I know there's lots of people being produced as PhDs in Malaysia. Now, there's been, obviously, I mean, let's not mince our words, there have been issues on quality. But perhaps, is that something that we really need to start tapping? I mean, graduates is, it's one issue. It's been a perennial issue since the 80s. If you go back, I think in the 70s, you came out as a graduate, you definitely got a job. But then since the 80s, it's been a problem always, right? But coming back to these postgraduates, where supposed to be the highest value, the cream la de creme of our intellectual power. What about them and how to use them? I know, Roshan, we talked about GE when we were with, you were with GE. They hired thousands of PhDs. Where's that taking place in Malaysia?
Yeah. I think that's
putting you on the spot. Sorry.
No worries. No, but I completely agree with you. And this is one of the things that we have this conversation at the ministry level. And because we have, very smart people, PhD, they're working at universities, and they're coming up with, fantastic research. So, one of the things that we look at, and this is something that the ministry have organized, is that they have a pitching sessions to the startups. So Cradle, we provide the startups. So say for example, we have a research done on AI. We have research done on some of the deep tech technologies that the startups can identify and see whether if that fits in. Because like I said, we marry these two people together, and again, this is what I mentioned at my talk yesterday at APU, where you have universities, they are funded to do research, but their priority probably not commercializing it, because their priority is to go into that technology or that product. Startups, on the other hand, they're always thinking about how to make money from this, so and we have not seen yet, but that's one of the things that we see. Perhaps if we have a sessions, and they're having a monthly sessions on this, they've only started to do this 2 months ago, so we are still gathering data on whether there are actually suitable matches. But there is a platform for it that the government
what is this
has
platform
started.
called? What's the platform called?
Pitching university pitching sessions. I can give you some
I think
some
that
more
would be
information
great,
of that.
especially for the masters and PhD people. I think that would be absolutely useful if you can put that on the
and
website.
plus, so for example, our Cradle Fund, spin-offs from universities are also allowed to apply for our Cradle Fund. But a lot of the issue stems from, because we are tied with this particular university, we can't be in a Sendirian Berhad company, we can't be a director, we can't be so those are the things that and they're trying to decide, okay, who is on that Sendirian Berhad company, because in order to get a grant from us, it needs to be a Sendirian Berhad company. So I think those are some of the things which we are still tying up,
So
getting clarity with
the local infrastructure, the local systems and structures, I guess, that are impeding some of these.
We have some fantastic. We've seen some really, really brilliant research work from research institutes. And again, in order for them to actually be on a Sendirian Berhad company, apparently they need approvals or something like that. So we're still trying to see. Unlike like you said, international universities, they can do
they encourage it. They encourage the professors to get on boards and so on and so forth.
Get on boards and become advisors. So we have, at SIMW, we have a few advisors on MIT, who we pay. They can't do that in Malaysia. So
interesting.
If we can address that, I think that will opens up a lot of opportunities for a lot of our PhDs. And it's incentives as well, because I have a lot of people asking me, is it still worth getting a PhD now? Is it still worth taking that time to get that doctorate or whatever? It doesn't seem to be, something that people look for, unlike, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, everyone's like, want to get a doctorate or PhD or spend time doing research. Now, apparently, there's no commercial incentive of that. A couple of months ago, we look at the, allowance that were given to Peneliti. It's very, very small. Who's going to do that? It's lower than
It's true. Okay, so fundamentally, there's something I want to get to Cradle a little bit. And I think the biggest question a lot of people have is this whole Malaysian digital economy blueprint, right, with the target of 5,000 startups by 2025. So I mean, I guess the question would be, how is Cradle supporting it? And I think more interestingly, at least for me, because I have an ambition of becoming one day, my organization becoming one of the first unicorns in Malaysia. But why haven't we produced a unicorn in Malaysia? And how is Cradle helping in that space, in terms of getting us to that 5,000 startup number, but also to get us, more importantly, I think it's not about the number of startups, but the quality of the startups will be, to get us through that unicorn hurdle that we have yet to overcome.
Yeah. Okay. So on the 5,000 startups, we were told it's not new startups. is the total number of startups.
Okay.
And we look at a number of documents or platforms. At the moment, there's no single data that captures the number of startups at the moment. We've got,
Right.
someone was saying that we have, like Cradle itself, we have funded over around 1,000 startups, but we don't have data. This 1,000
Say,
out
yeah,
of this 1,000 startups, how many are still around? And we had this
Wow.
conversation yesterday. But just because they're not around, that doesn't mean that they are failed. But
Right.
they could be acquired. I mean, we've seen some examples where they're
Sure, sure.
acquired, by the big companies. So that doesn't mean that they fail. So number one, I think the first thing that we need to do is to actually have a mechanism to capture the data. There's one publication says that Malaysia has already got over 3,000 startups, but again that data needs to be verified. So I think one of the things that Mosti is currently doing, they're trying to capture all the number of startups. Firstly, by the agencies under Mosti, so is the likes of, so we have been giving information, so Cradle, MathCap, MDV, Magic, and of course there's a lot of duplication as well. So, so I think to get to that 5,000 startups, it's not going to be a big issue. Now, when the blueprint was first launched, so one of the first thing that the ministry did, our KSU said, and they are getting data from us as well. What are our targets, up to 2025? What are our targets? And it's not just the number of startups that we fund, but the number of startups that we nurture, we coach. As you know, we have a coach and grow program. So even though we don't fund them directly, but we provide them, with a training program. So these are, just because we don't fund them, that doesn't mean that we've created them. Again, we did my hackathon last year. There's over 1,000, applicants, a huge number of shortlisted. Now, once they are shortlisted up to the point where, they submit, we actually give them, boot camp, pitching sessions, and once they've been shortlisted, we give them further training for them to do the pitching, and even though they may not win, so a lot of the times we have 36 winners, but we've got close to 100 of them who went through this program and they could easily set a startup. And then out of that 36 winners, we also connected them to, VC. So even if, so currently they're doing the prototype of their solutions, of their winning solutions with the government agencies. So even if the project is not deployed, nothing to stop them to market to, other potential users and acquirers of that project as well, Okay. So it's not just a number of startups that we fund, it's the startups that we develop. They could get funds from elsewhere. They have a lot of angel investors and a lot of accelerators, a lot of VCs as well that could fund them. So
and then regarding the second piece, that getting us to that unicorn piece, right? Which it's like badminton trying to win a world championship or Olympic gold, like the holy grail that never comes, right? How do we get there?
Again, like I said, to the startups that are under our radar, or when the ones that we that we came with, again, is your services technology, because you can't just rely on Malaysians alone. I mean, you see I wouldn't call it a Malaysian unicorn, but you see how fast they have scaled to shores beyond Malaysia. So it needs to have that scalability, and so there are 2 or 3 what we call it sunicorns, that potentially are unicorns, and the traits that we saw is that they're all, in fact, one of them have got more overseas business than Malaysian business. In fact, they are much bigger Malaysia compared to them in Malaysia, right? So that's number one. And then number one is that they're already a regional player. So I think to be that sunicorns or unicorns or whatever, like, you need to have beyond Malaysian shores. Malaysian alone, you can't
Yeah.
You can't
I
go
think
to
that's a very
that
important
size.
point.
You can't go to that
Maybe
size.
just Rafiza, I don't know if you know, but I think just beyond the conversation, but on the data, we had a guest on the show called Arvin. I think he has actually put together that he's got an
I've had a conversation with Arvin also.
Excellent. Excellent. All right.
Yeah. So there's actually quite a lot of different private initiatives that try to collect the data. Okay, now Cradle, with the company that we fund, they are under obligation because we put it in our TNC grant that they have to provide us the data throughout the disbursement period and 2 years after that monitoring period. So the data that we collect is, it can be validated. But others, it's based on voluntary basis. As you know, a lot of the startups, they're not quite so willing to provide their data. Getting data issue at the moment is a bit of an issue. So if you see SG, in Singapore, they have the SG Innovate, right? And you see lists of all the startups. Now, the reason why there is an incentive for the startups to actually provide the data, because the data has got to be provided by the startups itself, and it's on a voluntary basis. The reason why they do that, because that it's an investment platform. So so those are the sort of things. So unless there is an incentive, a carrot for the startups to provide data, no one's gonna reveal anything.
Great. So, Rafi, just to close out, I think there's a question: how much do you really have? I assume this is not your own personal, but Cradle, and how do you allocate by industry, novel idea, scalability?
Personally, I don't have
not
much.
No, I mean for Cradle, do you really have that fund to make all these ideas come about? I guess, very quickly, another question is: at what point would the business not be termed a startup? And a going concern. Very quickly, I think this has been an exciting conversation. So the time's coming to an end.
Our own direct funding that we can provide is in a range of about 20 million for this year. Last year, we had an allocation of 26.5. Okay. And what we saw this year is there's a significantly less number of applications for some reasons. We used to be getting more than 100 a month. Up to last month alone, up to end of May, we only received 167 applications. So the number of applications is significantly smaller. For some reason or another, I don't have an answer for that. Okay. Now, But we work with other agencies as well. We work very closely with MDV, MTDC. So I sit on the approving committee of the Technology Sandbox. So collectively, there's significantly more than 20 million. And as you know, Mostly also launch Malaysian Grand Challenge. That's 220 million in total. So startups can also apply to that. So there's 5 funds under, the Malaysian Grand Challenge. And to some of the funds that we can't fund, we also work with other organizations like state agencies. So they have grants as well for startups. And we've got some of our staff that are on their panel judges, So it's not just... So when we talk about fund, we shouldn't look at from one agency alone. We should look at in totality, And like I said, there's a lot of funds out there. Penjana Capital, I think, is still struggling to fund Malaysian startups. So it's, now what we're looking at Cradle is to see how we can, and this is to follow up on, some of the programs that we do, because we look at early stage startups. So from, seed and pre-seed level. And this is where we really need to groom the founders and the management team to get them prepared so that, they are investable. So we are working very closely with the other VCs. How can we be the deal flow? Good quality startup right from the start. Strong business model, strong business acumen, strong identification of the management team, because we find that, sometimes the founders, they're very brilliant, they're very good idea, but they don't have execution capability. How could we make sure that they all have that, the right recipe so that they can scale up and they can, become the next unicorn? Yeah.
Okay. So sorry again, sorry to cut you out, but
No,
I just want to one final comment. I think from Michael Warren, who's I think been
Hi,
involved
Michael.
quite a bit in the startup scene. Government pandemic funds are generally channeled to government agencies to drive entrepreneurial support into the markets. Universities, however, funding reduced these days, so they tend
Not
to
just
gravitate
universities,
towards,
everywhere.
yeah, but I mean, they tend to gravitate to its core business, which is to educate students and really not commercializing some of these ideas or entrepreneurships. So there is this gap, and I don't think we can address that in this show, Michael, at this point in time. But I mean, this would be a good question, I think, for us to think through. And so Rafiza, as we wrap up, what sort of final thoughts, and then I'll get Ravi to share some of his. But I mean, what would be your final thoughts or your piece of advice that you would give startup founders, but also SMEs that may be struggling and may have cash concerns and may have to navigate this pandemic in a very different, innovative way? What sort of final advice we want to leave with them?
I think don't limit yourself to just one funding sources. We are at a stage where we need to look at all various forms. I know a lot of early stage startups are quite reluctant to get angel investors in. They are probably a bit concerned because they don't want their shareholding be diluted. But if you're very smart at selecting who your angel investors are, they're not just providing fund, but they're providing market access. They're providing, capability that you might not have. So I for me at the early stage, I know when I talk to the early stage founders, they want to hold on to their shareholding as long as possible. Sometimes, yes, you can do that for a start, but just be open-minded. There are actually a lot of angel investors out there who can bring significantly value, not just funding, but advice, coaching, strategic market access, help to open doors. Just be open to that,
Sure. No, thanks. And Gerard, I guess wants to make a point. Seriously, why are we so focused on creating unicorns here? You do not create the unicorn. Let's not get caught up in the euphoria of having our Facebooks and Googles and so on. Focus on what you know best and add value to the ecosystem. So thanks, Gerard, for that point. And Ravi, you want to wrap up and share your final thoughts and what you took away from today's episode with Rafiza.
Okay, two things. If I'm going to just make it, I think what I learned most, and I think those of you got friends who are, doctorates, PhD people, that's something I learned. There's, contact Cradle or, the government matching program, because I think that's, where we have to, these are people who can already contribute with new ideas. Graduates, it's a problem. It's been a perennial problem. It needs to be solved. But I think that's where, where the maybe hopefully some of the big leaps can be made and, something good can come out. The second takeaway is it's disappointing to hear that, funds are being taken away from universities, Cradle and so on. On the other side of the coin on rethinking economics, we've been big on modern monetary theory. It is crisis time. The only people who have money are the government with the central bank in ringgit terms. And I pray the government will start rethinking that, having a single A rating is not the most important thing in the world, but more important is how do we make our economy tick better.
All right, and so that's a wrap for our show today. Thank you so much, Rafiza. Thank you. I think there's a lot of insights. I want to just redirect people to Cradle. That's the website right there, cradle.com.my. Check that out, and I think there are lots of grants. There are lots of exciting opportunities. I look forward to some of these programs. I think there's a lot of opportunity to harness some of our talent or latent talent that we have out in Malaysia. And potentially, I think the point that you made, I think is very interesting, is that if you aspire to be a unicorn and want to be this big, you got to be outside of Malaysia. You got to be looking at the global markets. You got to be positioning and building your business from scratch as a global business, not as a local business. So I think those are very, very important insights. Thank you so much. And with that, this is this week's episode of Rethinking Balance Sheets. We're going to end now with a short little video, as always, of our app, Nicole. So goodbye, everyone, and have a fantastic weekend. Take care.
Thank you.